Thanks so much for checking out another weekly Friday segment where I debate and discuss something with my good friend 30 and So Gaming, as well as a live chat, and we're going to do a bit of a recap of the Xbox FTC case. Closing arguments have happened. The judge is going to take about a week or two to come to the decision, and then we'll obviously have to report on that when that happens. If you're watching this as a past broadcast, thanks so much for supporting these segments. The Diablo is Boring stream did so well, and if you like that, be sure to hit subscribe and the bell button on this one. If you're coming over from the other stream that we already did this morning, I did a recap of the closing arguments as well as the CFO's arguments and his statements that I thought were pretty telling. I'm going to bring everybody over with a redirect. And just make sure you are smashing the like. I will gift the members that I owe. You guys are really close to 200. So, Mike, oh man, you said it was like studying for the SATs, this cramming. I've never in my life thought that I would be sick of looking at Twitter threads about a legal case.
Creature's like, yeah, you're talking about the FTC tomorrow. I'm like, oh boy, fantastic. And I crunched this morning. I'm like looking through a whole bunch of stuff. So if you say something, because I haven't been following closely. Okay. So as you say the question, I might not know about the particular thing, but I can reference it and obviously give you my opinion on it after I hear it.
Well, basically, to summarize for anybody who's not familiar with the case, and this is for Mike and the listeners, what this was a hearing for the preliminary injunction. This was not a hearing to block. If they argue if the FTC successfully argues the merits of the case and that they can win based on those merits, they will be granted their preliminary injunction. And then that allows them further investigation, stop the whole thing. Let us look at this is what they're essentially asking for.
Yeah, basically this was just to prolong so they can get more of their crap together so they can then have more evidence and stuff down the road.
Right. And everybody looks at this differently. My own estimation was, in 1 week's time, we've seen enough emails, we've seen enough revelations to warrant the merits of this case and to warrant more investigation. I think the deal is big enough on its own that it warrants further investigation, but
sure,
there was enough discovered that I think we need to see more, because even people that were in favor of this deal, I saw people leaving comments. They're like, yeah, this is not what I thought it was. Microsoft cannot be trusted, basically. Now, sure, there's the guys that are all excited. They think this is great, and they're cheering, and they want it to go through. That's fine. This isn't about who's right. This is about what we think and what we hope to have happen. Where are you on this? I mean, I know some people are just sick of it and want it to go through. Do you hope Microsoft gets the deal, or do you hope that they don't get the deal, just personally?
I honestly... I don't like consolidation like this. I don't like big businesses keep conglomerates going over, because I'm not looking at this as Xbox for Sony. I'm looking at this as Microsoft buying yet another gigantic other company and merging into their company, right? So there's huge markets, and I understand that they're not going for Call of Duty. It's never been the Call of Duty case against PlayStation. It's been the bigger picture of going into mobile, going into PC, getting all this other stuff and consolidating things. So I personally don't care either way, because, I mean, if I cared that Comcast bought something, you know what I mean? It affects me, but I have no say in it to stop it anyway. You know what I'm saying? So all these big mergers, I would hope that it didn't happen because of Microsoft. As a gamer, I mean, I look at it as short term and go, oh yeah, well, Game Pass is going to get a lot more games and there are going to be more things. But in the long run, it's going to, in my opinion, it's going to hurt the industry just like it did for, the cable companies, just like it did for the phone companies. So it's that along the same line. So one way, I honestly don't care if it goes through because I have no say in it. But at the same time, I don't want it to go through because I don't like the consolidation.
Right, and I think that's the real sticking point here, is even the judge in the closing argument said, this isn't about the harm that will happen to Sony, it's about the consumers, which I pushed back on what she was saying a little bit, and so did the FTC, that if you allow harm to come to Sony, that will harm their consumers. That's the whole point, is that this could be tectonic and cause so much market disruption that consumers lose choice, lose power, like have to go buy new machines or go over here to play games, and that's the ultimate problem. And I believe the FTC did a good job arguing that and showing if people think their models or their argumentations aren't compelling, just the discovery alone of some of the things that Microsoft has said, some of the things that transpired, I thought were pretty telling over the course of this week.
See, the stuff that I've read, it almost seemed to me, though, that the FTC wasn't... I know they're there for us, right? But it seemed like they were fighting for Sony, and that's why the judge multiple times was getting frustrated with them by saying, you know, at one point she did say, we're here for the consumers, not for Sony, right? Like, so I think they, in my opinion, I don't think they sold it. I think that's telling when they were actually making points towards for Sony and not for consumers, right? They didn't put consumers first in their deposition. They put Sony first, and I don't think they made their case very good for that particular section.
Well, I mean, maybe they didn't. I mean, I think the challenge there is you have to use lots of models and argumentation to show just how much Sony's revenue would be disrupted and damaged, and what that means for consumers, right? It stifles innovation, it stifles choice, and I think that's the problem in these discussions is the catalyst to the consumer damage is Sony. Like that 48%, so much money, so many consumers are over there playing Call of Duty, and that's where the FTC spent a lot of their time was you're gonna harm Sony. It's like, well, it's not about Sony. It's like, well, okay, but that then trickles down into damage to the consumer or frustrations for consumer choice. Sure,
but they're also they're breaking it down for just that. They kept using Call of Duty, right? They kept using a lot of the stuff. Because if you look at it, I know this is going to like spread into a different type of conversation, but even exclusive titles that Sony's doing, and this is why I don't care if one company, they all do it. They're all businesses. There's no rule in business, right? Business is about making money, and how they go about those shady businesses, how they do the business practices of what they do or what they're trying to do, that's always going to be in. So if they were focusing on Call of Duty for a lot of the months for the CMA and the FTC and all this stuff, and exclusivity, even if they take Call of Duty and give them the extra zombie mode, right? Or God of War being exclusive first party. I understand it's first party, but that could be consumer denigrating because of, well, I can't buy the zombie mode or play the zombie mode unless I get a PlayStation. Well, I already own a PC, or I own a Switch, or I own an Xbox, and I can't play those game modes. So now I have to go spend $500 to go play that game mode on that system. Or I want to go play God of War on that system. So looking at this, if Microsoft picks up Call of Duty and Activision, even though they said they're not making it exclusive, right? Even though they say it, but we don't believe it because of what happened with ZeniMax, people look at that and go, well, they're just buying up other companies and then making them first-party titles, and that's where it comes down to the business model. The business model is there are no rules to business. If I buy something and I spent $60 billion, almost $70 billion on it, you damn right I'm going to make it exclusive if I wanted to, because that's my right, because I spent all that money, right?
Well, there are rules for business. There are rules against vertical foreclosure. Like there's things to protect against exactly what I feel the FTC uncovered. I feel they uncovered vertical foreclosure strategy. The idea of we're going to spend you out of business. We're going to buy all this up, and we can afford to lose money for 20 years. You can't.
Sure.
Which is anti-competitive. Which is
Correct,
why you can't. This is why I don't think people can make it monolithic and act as if all that matters is the consumer. That's not necessarily true. If you allow a company to do vertical foreclosure and create anti-competitive markets, that damages the companies, which in turn damages the consumer and harms consumer choice. Like that's why I get where the judge was coming from, and I get where people in chat are coming from, but it's not that simplistic. It's not that monolithic.
Sure, but again, if they have a contract right now with Call of Duty, right, which I think ends next year, like this is the last Call of Duty, or this year I think it ends for Call of Duty, right? They've already stated ahead of time, and again, they're focusing on Call of Duty, that we're going to give 10-year deals to everybody. Like, they don't want to take that particular game away. But then it gets into the other conversation of, well, Call of Duty is going to be worse on PlayStation now because it's no longer third party, so they can't share certain things with it. But then that also goes into a conversation, if it was third party still, then they're paying money to have exclusive rights for 1 year, which is also, again, against against consumers.
What's against consumers?
Buying exclusivity for certain game modes or certain things for that particular consumer base.
But the reason that you would say that there are levels there that you would say there's a level of anti-competitive, or actually there's a level of competitive that does take away choice from consumers, right? It's like when someone buys the rights to show the movie first on their platform, right?
Right. You're gonna pay for Hulu or pay for whatever. Yeah.
That's a form of competitiveness that's allowed because they don't own it. They're paying for that deal. So when Sony approaches Activision, brokers that deal, and Activision agrees, that is a form of competitive nature that also helps
Absolutely.
Sony. But this is something people keep forgetting. A lot of the times in those deals, the publisher's throwing their weight around. Square Enix has done it with Final Fantasy. Everyone wants to blame Sony for Final Fantasy. We found out that Square Enix was shopping it around, and they took the highest bidder, right? Because they know their property. Yeah, they know their property's valuable. Like, Square Enix is like, are you kidding me? Final Fantasy's really valuable. Like, they shopped it around, and Microsoft's offer wasn't high enough. And I think that's what keeps getting lost in the weeds here is everybody thinks paying for timed exclusivity or paying for an exclusive game is equal to market consolidation that leads to vertical foreclosure. It's like those are not the same.
No, but it also, yeah, but it also does affect consumers, right? Like, for instance, Hogwarts Legacy has that one mission, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they not force people. You still have a choice, but if you want more for your money, you're like, well, I don't own both systems right now, right? I don't own any system, and I see that I want Hogwarts Legacy. Hogwarts Legacy has that extra mission. You're getting more for your money. You're like, oh, well, I'm going to go towards PlayStation. And everyone's like, well, you can still get Hogwarts Legacy. Sure, you could, but for that particular mode for 1 year, or Destiny for that strike that was for 1 year, or for Call of Duty that had the zombie mode that was in there for 1 year.
Yeah.
After a year, that player base is not going to be excited. Oh, we finally get the zombie mode in the right. You know what I mean? So it does have the same effects of, sure, you have choice, and yes, they don't own the company, but it's still against the consumers, right? Because the consumer, just like we all want crossplay, we all want a cross-platform so we can all play where we want and do what they want, but the companies don't want us to do that. And I'm not saying Sony is the only one that does this. Obviously, back in the 360 days and whatnot, Xbox did the exact same thing. They paid for exclusivity with Tomb Raider and all the other things to try to get people to come to that platform. I think why Microsoft is doing what they're doing is they just don't want to get in the bidding war, right? So if COD comes out and then Sony says, oh yeah, we want to do another Zombie Nation, whatever, game mode for 1 year exclusive, Microsoft's like, well, we want to do one too. And Activision's like, well, Sony already offered us money, so what are you offering us? And they go back and forth. It's like buying a house, and the real estate guy going, well, there's another person that has an offer on the table, and you're gonna have to make a decision now, right? Like type of thing. And I think Microsoft was like, you know what, we got trillions of dollars. Let's make something happen here. We're trying to get people to come on Game Pass. We're trying to do more things down the road. We really don't care about Call of Duty, so let's just give them Call of Duty, like we said, because we're really in it for the mobile. We're really in it for PC. So let's just buy the whole company and then still give them Call of Duty. And then Sony comes out and says, well, we're not going to give you the dev kits for our next PlayStation because we don't want to give you the trade secrets. So it starts to trickle down even more problems of it. It's not just Call of Duty going off the PlayStation. It's other potential downfalls. Because what did they make? 15 billion or something like that? You
got to be careful with that stat. It's that Call of Duty customers, by buying the game as well as accessories, hardware, microtransactions. Correct. If you just go to that customer base, they generate between $14 and $16 billion a year for Sony.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And people in chat are misunderstanding. I didn't say vertical mergers are anti-competitive. Vertical foreclosure mergers are anti-competitive. You need to do proper research into what that is. A vertical foreclosure merger is not the same as just a vertical merger. Vertical foreclosure merger is when you take a pipeline, you foreclose that pipeline, and that hurts your competitor, and it harms competition. That's not the same as just a vertical merger. That's the point. There was ample evidence in the last week that this is, and so was ZeniMax, a vertical foreclosure merger that harms the customer. So if you want to point to exclusivity deals or timed exclusivity deals, the difference there is that's an independent company that's shopping out their property. It's not the same. It is not the same. Where's the foreclosure? They modeled foreclosure for ZeniMax, told the publisher, they told the regulators they had no financial incentive to do it, and then they did it. To the point that the CFO was even surprised. He said, wow, when they foreclosed all of ZeniMax's current and future property to Xbox. No, it's ours. ZeniMax was surprised. The CFO was surprised. They told them that the regulators, we have no financial incentive to do this. That wasn't true. They modeled for it. They did have financial incentive to do it, evidenced by the fact that they did it. And yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that I lost my train of thought now.
Well, I wanted to go back to something you said about the exclusives and how they did it with Tomb Raider. I found that to be frustrating when Satya Nadella said that, well, I want to do away with exclusives, but the market leaders dictating competition. It's like, that is simply untrue. If you go back to the history of the Xbox 360, they did it with GTA. They did it with Call of Duty. The exclusive war started, honestly, it started with Nintendo, but Xbox furthered it in the 360 era. Just because they stopped doing it during the Xbox One era, what, you expected a ceasefire on exclusives just because you stopped doing it?
Well, no, PlayStation did it first in the PlayStation 2 days with the exclusivities and stuff like that, right?
Well, that's why I said ultimately Nintendo did it first. Ultimately, Nintendo tried to control the flow of property, and they tried to control their third-party relationships. That trickled into PS2. 360 era, Xbox did it as well.
Yeah, they all have to do it because they have to compete, right? They have to compete.
That's every market too. Like every market's trying to leverage their exclusivity deals on whatever property they can sell. It's not Sony started it or this person started. It's like everybody does it in every market.
Yeah, of course. If you have a gas station or a bakery across the street, and I open a bakery or a gas station across the street to compete with you, I'm going to have to do something different than you're doing to get consumers to come in, right? And if I do that thing, the person that already had that established business across the street's like, well, that's not fair. They're giving things for less price, right? So they have to start competing, right? But so it makes sense for a business to do what they have to do to survive or to break into the market, right? I hate when people say, well, they did it first, they did this first. They all do it. They all do the same thing because they all trying to compete into the market. Now, obviously, life's not fair. Businesses are not fair. Some people have more money than other businesses, and they can move their weight around, and that's what Microsoft is doing right now. They're flexing by paying $70 billion for an organization that they feel will make them bigger. I talked about this in the past, that Microsoft is Unicron, right? In my analogy, they have to just keep eating businesses up and take the nutrition in from that and then spit them out, right? That's why they'll take companies. EA's done it. Activision's done it. Sony's done it. They've all done where they take developers or publishers, eat them up, spit them out, take them and move them around inside their business, because that's just the way business is.
Well, and that's why somebody's saying Lono forgot that the PS2 did it first. I was simply citing that they did it in the 360 era. Don't act like you've not been doing it. Don't act like you didn't do it. And also, in the PS2 era, again, you're coming out of the reverberations of Nintendo. Every market does this. That's what's so funny is somebody said, if you cared about the consumer, you wouldn't want exclusives. You being ignorant of how the business world works is your own fault. If you look at every other industry, exclusivity is how they literally get you to become brand loyal. You just don't think that because you're entitled. Your entitlement doesn't change business history. It just doesn't. If you look at the history of television shows and networks on television, if you look at how they argue exclusivity for sporting events, if you look at how they do current television shows and current property, whether it's HBO or anybody, you're literally ignorant of how business operates. Like, your entitlement doesn't change business practice for the last 100 years. Exclusivity is how you drive brand loyalty. To ignore that factor in business is just absolutely ignorant. That's why I found Satya Nadella's commentary, especially coming from Microsoft, that's ignorant. Come on. You've been leveraging exclusivity for how many years, Microsoft?
Do we know, and I don't know how long he's been with the company. How long has Nadal been with the company? Do we know that?
I don't know. Somebody said, well, maybe he's not familiar with that history. Right. And I'm like, okay, you're the CEO of Microsoft. Maybe you should familiarize yourself with the history of gaming.
Yeah, but even if it was history, if he wasn't, and again, I don't know, I'm just saying, trying to look at a different perspective here. If he wasn't with them at that time, and I might be bullshitting here because he might be with them, but he looks at it and goes, well, I wasn't in this position, now I'm in this position, and I agree that I don't want it to be exclusive, but that's how the game is played, right? That's how the game is played, and the leader market is Sony, right? Sony is number one, and they have exclusives, and he's like, I don't like exclusives, but we have to play ball, right? You have to play ball. You have to do this to stay relevant in the market. So I don't know if him saying that is he's been there like 30 years, Chris, but has he been in that position when Xbox 360 was doing that? You see what I'm saying? That's what I'm asking. Right. I don't know. This is what I'm asking. If he was in that position, then that's a different story. If he wasn't in the position, then it's a completely different person. The person that was there before him believed in the market where they could buy exclusives. he is now in the position where he is now and says, I don't agree. I don't want to have exclusives, but the industry leader has exclusives. So this is how we have to play ball.
Right. The problem is he shaped it as if they're dictating competition. And I think, again, that just betrays how business is done. Like,
right.
you can't be Microsoft and claim they're dictating exclusivity is how competition works. You're Microsoft. That's your MO. That's what you do. You push for exclusivity. You push for dominance. You've done this historically. That's how they got to be where they are right now. They're not the second largest company in the world because they're Johnny Appleseed, kumbaya, open arms, anti-exclusivity. It's bull. It's just a PR move. That's why I wasn't compelled by it. It's like you're Microsoft saying that. You're not the underdog here. You're the second largest company in the world. You just don't like not doing so great in gaming, and that's why they don't want to have exclusivity. Because they don't just want games everywhere. They want to be everywhere. They want to get their hooks in all these cloud contracts that apparently they didn't even crunch the financial impact of the Nintendo and the NVIDIA contracts, because those contracts were pure PR stunts. They didn't even actually weigh them out. The CFO confirmed that. They just use those as PR.
Oh, of course, because again, they don't care about that part of the deal. They just want the mobile. They want the PC. So they're like, yeah, we'll sign deals all day long. You want it? You want it? They're like Oprah Winfrey at the time. You want a car? You get a car. Everyone gets a car, right? You want Call of Duty? You get Call of Duty. You get Call of Duty. Everybody gets Call of Duty. 10-year contract. Let's do it, right? They didn't care because that's not the linchpin that's holding everything together. That's what the public wants. That's what Sony wants. That's what the CMA wanted. That's what the FTC wanted. So they're like, yeah, sure. Yeah, have Call of Duty. We don't care. We want to get in the mobile market. The mobile market's a much bigger market than it's the video game space is chump change compared to the mobile space.
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny, some of the emails they were talking about, all that matters is mobile. And like Phil entertained the idea of shuttering Xbox and launching mobile and just going purely mobile. And it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if that's part of the goal here. Like, you're not a priority on console. I don't think Game Pass is a priority either. I don't. I think they want cloud and mobile dominance. That's the key. That's what's endemic to the future, I think.
See, I think Game Pass and mobile go hand to hand, right? So the leader in video games right now in mobile market is Apple, and they have Apple Arcade. They have a subscription service that's where that's what's winning right now for the mobile market, right? Microsoft doesn't have that. Game Pass is that thing, and if they get the mobile market, they can merge those things together. And then now Game Pass is not only on the console like it is, but it's on the mobile, and all the stuff that's in mobile gaming and regular gaming and all that stuff just goes together. In my speculation is that's what they want to do.
I don't disagree with that. My main idea is that these people that think Game Pass and their console experience right now, I just don't think that's the priority long term. I think the priority is kind of what you said. It needs to be more cloud mobile based, and Game Pass works there. Game Pass works on a television. The question obviously would be is, can infrastructure catch up so that cloud isn't so bad? I mean, even Bobby Kotick said that you wouldn't want to play Call of Duty on the cloud. So that's a long way off in many people's estimation. But Jim Ryan believes that between 2025 and 2035, cloud will become significant in the gaming space. I think that's one of the reasons they're trying to get in with the queue. I think the queue will be remote play to begin with, but I think eventually they'll probably enable cloud because they see where that's going. They see the endemic nature of cell phones. It'll be similar with the way that the cloud goes, I think. And now, going through, this deal, one of the things that came out was that Pete Hines and ZeniMax executives and Bethesda were unhappy about being told to make their games exclusive. And for the longest time, people were like, that they were happy about this deal. They were excited for this deal. Well, now the truth has come out that it seems as though ZeniMax was sold a bill of goods, so were the regulators, and so was the public on this deal, which that doesn't give anybody pause about Activision, it seems. They just know, full steam ahead. Like, Microsoft can say and do whatever they want, apparently.
Sure, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know how just some guy with no viewers on the internet can predict that, they're going to get exclusive, right? I said they're not exclusive until they are. Again, when you spend $7 billion in a company, sure, you didn't make those games, but they also haven't released yet. And so now you bought them before they release, and now you get to decide the games that are in production if you want to make them solo on your console or for everybody. And I know people don't look at it this way, and it's a little off topic of FTC talk, but Microsoft is not just making it for Xbox. You can get it for PC as well. So if Sony got the deal with Bethesda, then it would just be on PlayStation. And if Xbox gets the deal, it's on Xbox and PC. So there's two ways. Now, obviously, Sony probably would push it over to PC at a later date, but they don't want to go day and date on both platforms. We know their business model. They want it to be on Sony PlayStation first and then move on over. So Pete Hines being upset about, well, I didn't know this was... Look, if you own a business and someone comes in, they get to make the choices. They can tell you, yeah, everything's fine. Everything's staying the same. Nothing's changing. Everything's good until they go crunch the numbers and they go, yeah, you know what? This is low. This game would be huge for us if we put it on our system. And they go, hey, by the way, you guys are no longer making it for PlayStation. They're like, what the hell? At this point, Bethesda and ZeniMax are under the belt, okay, of Microsoft, and they don't get to make a choice anymore if they want to ship it out to the other customers, to the other platforms, because now Big Papa Microsoft is now making the decisions for them. Hands-off approach for making development, hands-on approach when they want to make the money, right? So that's just the way business is.
Right. I think the issue is that it establishes a pattern of behavior. Like, my question to people, of course it does, because they told the regulators, we have no financial incentive to do foreclosure. We'll do case by case. That was simply untrue. They did have financial incentive, and it wasn't case by case, to the point that the CFO himself was surprised when Phil Spencer was like, not just new, but all IP going forward is ours. It's all exclusive. That's not at all what they told regulators. This wasn't case by case. This was sweeping.
Well, see, this is a hard, as a person that's not working for Microsoft, and I'm not Phil Spencer, but if Phil Spencer changed his mind like that from when they purchased it to when he made that choice and the CFO was shocked about it, there had to be other people pressuring Phil Spencer to push and make that choice, right? I don't think Phil Spencer himself was just like, oh yeah, we're making Starfield and everything else exclusive from now on, right? There has to be other people that push the button, and he, even though Phil Spencer is the head, he's still working for somebody, right? He's still under... So he probably didn't even want to do it, but he's got to do what he's got to do. And again,
that's not true. According to the CFO, it was all up to him. It was his choice. This wasn't something that came from above. This was CFO testified. This was all Phil Spencer's choice. And the main issue that people are missing in the chat, they're like, well, how do you establish a pattern with one instance? They modeled foreclosure, which means they had modeled and had financial incentive for foreclosure, and they told the regulators they didn't. They lied to the regulators. That's the issue. That's the problem. Like, I don't think some bigwig came in and told Phil to do this. This was Phil's call, and they knew they were doing it all along because they modeled it, and even Booty was like, yeah, we can't make changes until the deal goes through. They knew once the deal went through, they were going to go back on what they said.
I mean, again, business is business, right? I know that sounds... I know someone's accusing me a trust... What did you say? Just wait. You said, Mike seems like a kind of guy that roots for the trust fund kids to do horrible things to others because they have the money to get away with it. I mean, sure, that happens, right? Because, the world is the world and things happen and life's not fair. So, yeah, I don't really root for the trust fund kid to do that, but usually that's what happens. The someone that has the more money gets away with stuff because they can.
Well, and
those are realities.
And to respond to Arjun saying it was case by case, Deathloop and Ghostwire were on PlayStation. They could have decided to buy out those exclusivity contracts. That's just simply false. That's presumption. They are legally obligated to honor those contracts. To get out of those contracts would have required litigation, not a buyout. You're simply saying something that is false.
Deathloop and stuff like that. Yeah.
Those contracts had to be obligated. That's per any merger. You have to honor existing contracts. They couldn't just go and buy out of those. It would have required actual litigation to breach the contracts. Oh, they didn't go and try and buy out. You try and make them look like the good guy for doing something they're legally obligated to do. That wasn't case by case. And case by case language was not referring to existing contracts. So you're also misusing the context of what they were saying. They were not saying case by case with reference to existing contracts. They were talking about the future titles coming. They were never referring to existing contracts. You're misusing that section.
So I have a weird analogy, right? If I have a dog and someone approaches my property, right, and the dog just senses he doesn't like that person and he's very aggressive towards that person, right? Does that mean my dog's an aggressive person to every single person that comes on? So what I'm saying here is, if the business model of Bethesda was to take that and then make it where it's all exclusive, can we assume, based on a court setting, that they're going to do the exact same thing with Activision? You can assume, because based on, the ZeniMax deal, what they've done with Starfield and at Redfall at the time, right? Nothing else so far, because nothing else has been out from Bethesda's side, right? There's games that they have that are out, and there's games that are coming out that could be, but we know Indiana Jones got leaked, that it's going to be exclusive as well. But you can't prove that they're going to do that, because that's the future. You don't know what they're going to do. But yes, under the assumption that they did it with ZeniMax, so you have to do it with Activision Blizzard as well, right?
Right. And Mo, you're misquoting them. This happens all the time. You guys always misquote and misrepresent. They didn't say they had no financial incentive to take things away. They said they had no financial incentive to foreclose or do foreclosure strategy. You're misrepresenting what was said. It's frustrating to constantly have to deal with lies. That's not what they said. We're going to move on, because we're getting stuck with people who constantly sidetrack with dishonesty. So as they moved through the case, we get to Booty's email about, we're in a unique position to spend Sony out of business. And he references how they would be better off losing $2 to $3 billion to keep Sony from becoming the Disney of gaming. And he even says that Google's 3 to 4 years away from being able to get a studio up and running. Amazon has shown no ability to execute on game content. He concedes that Sony's the only player who could compete with Game Pass, right? And he says, we have a 2-year and 10 million sub lead. What were your thoughts on this? We could spend Sony out of business. They're the only real competitor to Game Pass. Everybody wanted to hand wave and say, oh, that was an old strategy. That's not what he was talking about. It seems like that was the strategy, because they set their sights on outspending Sony. They modeled foreclosure strategy on how much Game Pass boost do we need if we lose money from Sony. That the CFO confirmed. They put this strategy in place that Booty's talking about here.
Yeah, the wordage is very incriminating, basically. I mean, them saying we're going to spend them out of business, that's intent, right? That's intent, because those are words coming straight out of the guy's mouth saying that this is what we're trying to do. The intent of them making Call of Duty, they've never said that, so you can't intent to say that they're going to do that. But this particular saying that he said, 100%, like this was a mistake said in an email, and now it's out. So it makes them look really bad in my eyes to say that, yeah, we're going to spend until the other company's out. But if they did that, let's be honest, they would be detrimental to Microsoft as well, because you need competition. And if you completely just wipe out the other competition, then that would also hurt them as well.
That is something that they've weighed, and that's one of their main arguments, is that they are counting on that revenue from Sony. The issue would be is a foreclosure strategy doesn't have to be immediate. It can be long and drawn out. Over 10 years, they could slowly suffer loss of revenue by trickling down what Sony gets and trying to make it up on Game Pass. That, again, is where the vertical foreclosure strategy comes in, and we're in new territory now. This isn't as simple as, I bought this lumber yard, you no longer get their stuff, and then you kill your competition by vertical foreclosure and you shut off a pipeline to your competitor. It's not that simple in gaming, because gaming is an ongoing, evolving thing. So they could say, oh yeah, Call of Duty comes around every year. It's not as simple as just buying lumber. There's a new title, there's new things, there's new skins, there's new seasons, and they could slowly lose that revenue. They've even modeled for that. They've modeled for a we lose revenue over time, and over those 10 years, we can make it back up. They actually modeled that foreclosure strategy on Bethesda as well, that it's okay if we lose this money, we'll make it up on the Game Pass long term. And in this exchange, Booty is pushing back on ending day and date. It seems that some people at Xbox want to get rid of day and date. And then we have Jim Ryan say, all the publishers he has spoken to, he spoke to a bunch of publishers, and he said, yeah, they all think this is value destructive. Bobby Kotick comes in and says, it's not good business. It's not a good business decision. I would never put these games over there. He basically says, I wouldn't even entertain it. Nobody can get the price to the right height. Do you think day and date long term is a problem here in light of Booty's pushing back against people at the company that want to get rid of it? And then you got Jim Ryan and Kotick kind of corroborating with other publishers that this is not the way.
I've said this on my stream, and I've said this for years. This is why I don't like Game Pass. I know a lot of people like day and date, but I'm a gamer, and this day and date hurts the industry because of it's unsustainable as it goes, right? I like the business model that Sony has, where you launch your game, you let it cook, you let it go out there for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and then you put it on the other platform. Because if you want people to come to your platform and not use your subscription service, the subscription service is like the icing on top of the cake. The cake is buy the game right away, okay? And then the icing is, oh, well, I didn't buy it right away. I can buy a used copy at GameStop or secondhand, or I can wait for it to come on the streaming service afterwards, and that's a nice value. What happens is you chop the legs out for a lot of the games that come out because they don't make enough money. And I know someone will jump in and be like, no, there's successful games. Yeah, they're the outlier, not the norm, right? So like Tunic, right? Tunic's an independent game. It was very successful, but it's also an independent game. AAA game Outriders suffered because of what they did, right? Because of Game Pass. There's other games that suffer because of the day and date, and others strive because just popularity. Something agrees with you, something doesn't agree with you. Mass market doesn't mass market. So I actually concur. I don't want Microsoft that do day and date. I would rather have, if Starfield came out first and then down the road it came onto Game Pass, I think that's a better strategy, but that's not the strategy that they're looking for. They want to try to get as many people into the thing as possible, because you know what? That other story that came out about Horizon costing was $212 million, and then Last of Us calling $220 million to make those games, and then they have to wait 5 to 7 years to make money back on those games. Microsoft, obviously, they have to pay other things, but Game Pass is making that budget of a Horizon or of a Last of Us every single month for the entire year. So January comes, they make $250 million. They're like, oh, by the way, here's a studio. Take this $250 million and go make a Last of Us. Go make a, you know what I mean? But they're not doing that. They're just taking that money and making lower tier games for their first party games. And then they're buying other companies that are already working on games to put on Game Pass without putting that time in to make it bake for 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, on the subject of Game Pass, this guy on Twitter named Grums, his name is Mark Kern. He was a CEO and designer. He's the former team lead for OG World of Warcraft, producer Diablo 2, StarCraft, and he thinks that Chrono Trigger is the best game. He was weighing in on the Game Pass stuff, and he says, of course devs are happy with Xbox Game Pass right now, as Microsoft is fully willing to lose billions today to secure content that will entrench them as the winner 10 years from now. This is Microsoft's email explaining the strategy. He says, P.S. Those sweetheart payments go away as soon as the service is the only place to go for your games as a dev. Yeah. And this is something that even Jez Corden touched on, writing for Windows Central. So Windows Central is very pro, Xbox, and even he said he's speaking to indie studios and AAA and AA studios that are skeptical about that, and says it's just so curated. Thanks for the 5 gifted members. That we're going to have to go over there and compete with that curated list. So I theorized something. I said, let's say Microsoft gets Activision Blizzard, and that suddenly Game Pass is basically an Activision Blizzard catalog. That makes it more threatening to third-party developers, indies, and AA studios. I can't survive over there. Number one, I have to accept your payment instead of going over there and being sold. If I go over there and I'm sold, I'm competing with Game Pass. That's a bunch of Activision Blizzard property. If I go on Game Pass, I'm competing with all this Activision Blizzard property. This could really turn them into what Zubair referred to yesterday as a walled garden that nobody else ever wants to be a part of, because you're just going to get choked out.
I mean, well, look at the streaming services now. Like when you go on Netflix and you look at the top, what's new, right? Past that, you're like, I want to watch something. Unless you know and put a search in, you got to go through a wall of covers of things, right? I look at this as the same way. I'm gonna say my age here now. Blockbuster Video back in the day, right? On Friday nights when you would go to Blockbuster Video, you would have that one case or two cases of the brand new films that just came out, and everyone would rush back there. There'd be like 100 copies of the thing. There's a whole store. The rest of the store is like bare bone because it's just like one copy of one thing, and you have to walk up and down each aisle and trying to find what movie you want to watch. That's what Game Pass is going to become, because there's going to be so many games on there. You're not going to know what's good unless they're promoted on the what you should play, what's new, what's top free, and which they do now. There's like 400 games. And then you start scrolling through them, you're just like, it just becomes one big blurry mess. And I did an article about this I think about 7-8 months ago about, I forget, one was the publisher of Tunic and one was an artist, and I forget what the developer was, but they were both talking about how if you're in early, right, it's fantastic, right? Because you're in, but later in the process, if year 3, year 4, year 5 in the cycle, it's going to be impossible for indie devs to try to get seen unless it's the top crop of the stuff. But they have to be on Game Pass because that's the contract they now have, right? Take the money up front, put it on there, and then it gets lost. And these devs are trying to make games for people to play, and then Microsoft puts out a stat going, well, more people buy games off Game Pass, more people play more games on Game Pass, but that's just a fraction of the population trying to find that game that they were going to go, that they could have spent $10, $15, $20 on the indie game if it was just outright. Instead, they're paying $10, and then they're playing that game on Game Pass, and it does hurt the industry in the long run based on it hurt the music industry, it hurt the movie industry. It's going to hurt the gaming industry. It's not going to change. It's going to be the exact same thing as it was for all the other industries.
Well, and I think people in chat are misunderstanding. I'm not trying to say that this is like evil or bad, or that that's going to be unfair or wrong. I'm saying, as a consumer, it should concern you if they suddenly flood Game Pass with Activision Blizzard. They're going to have a vested interest in cleaning up the list.
First party. Yes.
It'll be way more curated. It'll be far more dominated by their property. If this, just entertain the theory for a second. Stop being so quick to defend your favorite piece of plastic. Just entertain this as a possibility. Shaking your head and saying, nope, there's no way that happens. Just stop that for a second. Just consider the possibility that if Game Pass is flooded with Activision Blizzard property, it would exacerbate the problem that Xbox has right now. That third-party companies would look at that ecosystem and say, it's really hard to go over there and do anything because we're competing with some of the largest property in the world on a subscription service. We can't flourish over there. You're going to push more third-party companies into the arms of Sony because Sony is one hardware SKU, Sony is much easier to develop for, and you don't have to compete with Activision Blizzard property on a subservice at $10 a month. That's an easy decision. That's quite daunting for the average. Think about all of the independent publishers, all of the independent third-party studios looking at that. That's a daunting thing. So I actually don't think anybody's considered the ramifications of what this does long term. It could make the current situation that you're frustrated by, it could actually make it worse. Your Xbox and your Game Pass just becomes a hub for Activision Blizzard and Bethesda, which that's not bad. If that walled garden's great for you, thumbs up. My concern would be, that's it then. Third-party developers and publishers are going to avoid us going forward.
How many studios does Microsoft have right now without Activision Blizzard?
I believe it's between 23 and 26. It's somewhere in that range.
Okay, 23 to 26, and they came out and said they want to do what, 4 major games a year, one in each quarter, right? That's what they said.
Phil Spencer's phrase is a somewhere around this. This is a paraphrase. Yeah. He wants one big game per quarter at quality.
At quality, right? What that quality, that's here nor there, right? We don't know what their quality is compared to our quality, but so they want 4 titles and they have 24, whatever it was. So they could literally, they have the next 6 years planned out of one major game every quarter for the next 6 years, right? The more they get, the more companies they get, the more studios they get, and these are the ones that they didn't buy. These are the ones that are already in-house now. They can continuously make first-party title games for Game Pass. Well, when their first-party titles start to flush the market here, because that's what they're going to push. They want to push their first-party games than the third-party games. The third-party games will get pushed to the side more and more as they go because obviously, they don't care if you play Starfield. They don't care if you play Tunic. They don't care if you play No Man's Sky. They don't care if you play whatever game you want to play. They just want to put more games onto Game Pass because Game Pass is the thing. But Game Pass, they're going to push you more towards their first-party titles because they spent the big bucks on those. They spent the chump change on the other ones. They're just putting them on there because that's the icing on top of the cake. The cake is their games, and the icing is the indie games and everything else that's there.
Right, and it's being suggested in chat that if Sony swoops in to buy Activision, if this fails, I'll support that. First of all, you're completely ignorant. That's not possible. Sony doesn't have the capital to buy Activision Blizzard, and if it gets blocked by one company, it would certainly be blocked for the market leader. Maybe, I don't know, get a calculator. But secondly, that I'm not supporting of this at all. If it was Google or Amazon, we wouldn't even be covering this. We would all be linked arm in arm saying, this is terrible. We can't let Amazon or Google buy this. We can't let this happen. When it was suggested that Sony would try to buy Take-Two as a competitive move, I was 100% against that. I did a whole stream about it. I did a stream saying, I don't want Sony entering into a buying war. That's bad for the consumer. I don't want Sony. I don't want Amazon. I don't want Google. I don't want Google. Google. I don't want any of those companies doing it. Here's the thing that you miss in the equation. Number one, you're more interested in calling me a Sony pony than having a conversation, which is why you got called a Twitter drone. If you talk like a duck, I'm going to call you a duck. Listen to me. If this deal goes through, there's a reason Embracer just freed up capital and did some downsizing, okay? There's a reason that Tencent, Amazon, and Google, they're all very quiet right now because they're all waiting. If this deal goes through, the buying war begins. Everybody's going to be trying to scoop somebody up. And independent studios and independent publishers will feel very exposed if they're not a part of something much larger than themselves because they just won't have any buying power. So you don't know who I am and what my coverage is all about if you think, well, you'd be okay if this was Sony. No. You don't know that because I've been traditionally against anybody doing this.
The difference, though, if Amazon or Google picked up Activision Blizzard King, we wouldn't be in the same scenario because they don't own consoles, right? They don't have that same. They're not in the model. It's Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft that are in the three. If Amazon, yeah, they have Luna, right, and then Stadia was out for Google. Right, but they're not in the same boat as Microsoft. Microsoft, if they buy this is a huge swing in the industry. Where if Amazon, they just basically buy their way into the industry, right? This is why they're doing MMOs and whatnot. Same with Google. Google tried hard with the Stadia, but then it failed. And now, if they came in and bought Activision Blizzard, that would just be their into the market.
Yeah, and Tencent's been doing it too. Like this level of consolidation and purchases, it's just really, really bad overall. Like obviously, I'm not a watchdog group, so I can't be on guard for every company that's trying to buy. This is the biggest one in the history of gaming. This is unprecedented. That's why it's getting so much attention. If you want to cite these other companies, that's precisely the problem. And somebody saying Amazon buying ABK would result in more competition. Do you even pay attention at all to Amazon? Do you even know what you're saying? You think Amazon buying ABK would lead to more competition? That's unbelievable to think that. They would buy studios and have them doing nothing if it just meant that the competitors couldn't have it. Like Amazon's, you don't want Amazon doing that. That would be horrible. Look at what Amazon, oh my gosh, as a website, what they've done to companies. Get out of here. We would not want them at all to own this much property.
If hypothetically, if Amazon did buy them, because the cloud, I like how someone said it could be something with the cloud market. Yeah, but that you can't judge things what they could be. That's not valid, right? I mean, you could say it, sure, but if Amazon picked them up, they would just keep buying. Just look at Amazon as Microsoft, not as Xbox. They would just keep buying up companies in different areas and get bigger and bigger, and then do exactly what Amazon's doing. Right? Amazon sold what? Shoes or books? I forget which one it was when they first started.
Books.
It was just books, right?
Yeah.
And what are they doing now?
Everything. They might even do surgery if you need it. I mean,
it'll be fine. No big deal if Microsoft owns other things. It's not a big deal.
Oh, good golly. Yeah, I think that's where this deal gets kind of frustrating is because there are those of us that at at a very, very economically driven, historically driven, intellectually driven way, we think this is not a good idea. We've seen it hurt other things. I worked at a cell phone company and went through all this. It's terrible. Consumers don't like it. They don't benefit from it. It's not good. And being against that, just automatically being labeled a pony, like, again, your own insecurity and your own deriving your identity from a plastic box is your own personal problem. I call it I would say it's a character flaw. You need to do some heart work and some soul work, for crying out loud.
I mean, I'm a person that doesn't even like, I don't really like shopping at big box stores. I don't go to Target or Walmart because I'm for small businesses, right? I think if you own a light bulb company that you sell just light bulbs, people go and buy the light bulbs there. If you wanted a washer or dryer, you go to the washer and dryer mom and pop shop. I hate big businesses and conglomerate companies that taking over everything and push the small guys out. Yeah.
Now when the ZeniMax situation happened, this one was fun for me because we actually theorized that this is what happened, that Deathloop and Ghostwire going timed exclusive to Sony. The rumor was Starfield was going to go the same way. It was going to Sony. And I theorized, I said, I think Microsoft got wind and stepped in here. Even the guy that had heard the rumors, he thought the same thing. And I was told, no, it was never going to PlayStation. That's a lie. It was never going to be exclusive to PlayStation. That's not true. And Phil Spencer admits that that's exactly what happened. That was one of the impetus for them going after it, was we can't let this continue. So I thought that was pretty telling that Microsoft was willing to stand in the way of another exclusive by buying the parent company. Like, that's the power. Right. That's the power that Microsoft has. They entertained buying Square Enix probably for the same reason. They got tired of having to try to outbid Sony for Final Fantasy. Why? Because Microsoft knows Final Fantasy would not recoup cost on their platform. It's not popular there, right? So if you're mad about not getting Final Fantasy, it's because your consumer base wouldn't buy it, and Microsoft knows it, or they would have paid for it, right? So now Mo is saying it was going perma. Okay, if it was going to go, perma, we don't know that, because Phil says it was potentially going to skip Xbox. He's saying permanent exclusivity.
Permanent, like they were going to exclusive like Final Fantasy, Starfield, permanent?
No one knows, because Phil Spencer says it was the potential. They had heard the discussion was happening. So the discussion didn't get very far. Xbox jumped in and said, no, we're buying ZeniMax.
See, now, if that was the case, then in your eyes, is it better? Again, this is like two evils here, right? If PlayStation got it for permanent, right, and they didn't buy the company, they just paid outright to get it exclusively for however, like Grand Theft Auto back in the day, right? Would that be worse or better than in the situation if Microsoft buys it up now? Because if it was just on Sony, then it wouldn't come to PC, where now it's at least coming to PC and Xbox, right?
Yeah, but Xbox has also got it locked up into AMD exclusivity, so you're not even getting a full freedom on the PC that Nvidia owners would like to see.
But it's still on another platform other than just PlayStation then.
Well, I actually have a very different opinion on this. I think timed exclusivity is better for the games. This whole idea that, well, we launch it on Xbox and PC. Okay, let's see how quality it is then. Let's see how good it comes out, because there was an article just this morning that I plan to react to and use, and these redaction errors that happen with Sony because they use like the wrong Sharpie or whatever. The article is basically saying that it shows the economic value of exclusivity because, and the funny thing is this article literally within 24 hours of me saying something that was met with a lot of pushback, I said, economically, I think timed exclusivity and exclusivity will go up because it's more viable. As these projects get longer and longer, the quickest way to shrink project length as well as making a better quality product is making it for one system. And the economics behind it is sound. We're going to make more money. We're going to bring a product to the market faster if we do timed exclusivity. And now I've got an article backing me on this. They crunched the numbers. They looked at these redacted things that weren't so redacted, and they say, the economics behind this is sound, and I think you're going to see more of that. So launching on Xbox and PC oh, that's automatically better for the consumer. I don't buy into that axiom because it doesn't guarantee that you get a valuable product. In fact, I think we're moving away from that. I think the more multi-plat games come out, the more we're going to see that quality degrades or the delays just keep happening. Like, how many games just keep bumping the line, and it's always for polish, and then look at Jedi Survivor. It's a perfect test case of a multi-plat game that kept delaying, and then what did we get? We got a game that runs bad everywhere.
I mean, if it's... I'm okay if it's a game like, look at Hogwarts Legacy, right? Hogwarts Legacy is a third-party game. Came out on PlayStation and PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S first. Then they kept working on it. Then they released it for the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. And then they kept working on it. And then it was going to come out. I don't know if it's still coming out for the Switch or they canceled that. I forget which one it is now. I think it's still coming out for the Switch.
Hogwarts for Switch is coming out. It got bumped. It got bumped to November, I believe.
I would like to see more like that happen, where they're working and concentrating on the different areas, but making sure they're the best that they can be when they launch, right? Instead of going, we're going to release on 6 platforms at the exact same time. Mm-hmm. Instead, they're like, let's focus on this. Let's get this working the best it can be on this. Let's focus on this now since that one's out. I like that mentality better than where it's just exclusive for the one platform. I like this generation, last generation, and then whatever else.
Right. Somebody says that you said that was Disney's fault. Well, but that's incredibly reductionist to just isolate that and say, well, that's just Disney's fault. Right. Why do you think Disney was motivated to get a new Star Wars game out every 6 months? Why? Well, because they're motivated by profit, and that's the real issue. If you have giant companies that are motivated by profit, giant monolithic companies like Disney and like Microsoft, and they own all this property, and they're the ones calling the shots, and they're more worried about putting the game everywhere and ship dates being quick for turnaround, what do you think that's going to do to the quality of games? That's the whole point. The economic reality of timed exclusivity and exclusivity, I think, will push more people in this direction. If you take that reality and you you combine it with what I've already said about if they get Activision Blizzard, third-party companies are going to start looking at the Xbox ecosystem and Game Pass and saying, we can't swim in those waters. There's too many big fish over there. Those two things combined, you're going to funnel people to the PlayStation ecosystem. Just go ahead and add in the fact that developers are saying it's easier to develop for the PS5 because of all the research that Mark Cerny did. Those are a lot of factors that are going to drive people to say, it's just more economical. Build for one system.
Do you think not that it matters? Do you think if Starfield was just on a PC or PlayStation 5 exclusive, do you think it would have been 60 frames per second?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think it was 30 based on what Todd Howard said.
Yeah, Mark Cerny can't work miracles when Todd Howard's telling Lex Friedman, I'm okay with 30 FPS if the freedom is there for the player and the simulation's running well. I think Todd Howard I think he's so visionary that he's looking backwards. It's like, you can't say that it's running well if it's running at 30. Not in 2023. I think that's outdated. It's like watching the Snyder Cut. No, thank you. I think it looks bad because of you're going back in time. So I don't know. Now, Zubair saying DirectX. Again, if it would have been 100% exclusive to PS5 and they were able to work hand in hand with Mark Cerny in the architecture and the I/O, the data controller, the SSD, we need to find out where the bottleneck is. Everybody is speculating where the bottleneck is for Starfield. Once the game comes out and Digital Foundry gets their mitts on it, we'll know. Oh, DirectX was for Gilly, sorry. Once Digital Foundry gets their mitts on Starfield, we'll know where the bottleneck is. I firmly believe that it wouldn't have mattered where you put that game. I believe Todd Howard made foundational decisions with Starfield that made it, you're going to struggle. I think you're going to struggle to get 30 FPS on a PC, by the way. Unless you have a monster rig, I think you're going to struggle over there as well. It's how they built the game. And if it doesn't bother Todd Howard, this presumption that it's going to run at 60 on PC, Todd Howard's telling you, oh no, we're fine with 30 as long as the simulation's running well and you have a lot of freedom.
Yep.
All right, we got to move on. There's still a lot of things we haven't even got to. So that was kind of the first day of coverage where we had Jim. Yeah, that's an hour.
That's the first day.
That's the first day of coverage. So we had some stuff from Hines and Booty and Phil Spencer. And, you know, I did think it was funny that, like, Bobby Kotick got a greater revenue share from Microsoft by, like, threatening to take Call of Duty away. It's like, this is the guy you want to work with and do business with.
He's a mobster. He's a mobster.
He totally is. He's straight out of a movie. Now, I want to touch on when Jim Ryan took the stand. That was sort of the next big thing that we covered. I'm curious what you thought of his remarks about the PS6 dev kits, because I don't feel like this was looked at enough. I think this was pretty significant to say, we worked with Activision on DualSense features. We won't be able to send that kind of technology over there anymore if they're owned by Xbox. That's a threat to us. So PS6 dev kits won't be able to go to Activision, which I argued would lead to emergent degradation. I don't think the developers would be like, hey, let's make it worse for them, but it would be emergent degradation, meaning the opening weeks of Call of Duty would be less optimized on PlayStation because they can't share the PS6 dev kits with their competitor. I mean, that's standard practice. Sure. Microsoft was sued by Apple in like 1988 for stealing like 189 things for Windows 2.0. Okay, so this is standard practice. So if you're going, Jim Ryan never took the stand. It was a pre-recorded deposition. Do some research into how hearings like this work. It's just like going there and doing the deposition in person. Again, do some research. You're spreading falsehood in my chat, and you're trying my patience. So what did you think about that? Like, we can't share that with them. We cannot share the PS6 info with them, and I think that naturally leads to degradation of Call of Duty.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're saying that Call of Duty is going to be lesser of a Call of Duty on your system because they can't get the dev kit or whatever, then obviously when it comes out day and date on both consoles, not day and date on Game Pass, but day and date on both consoles, they're going to be at the lesser of the two, which would be the Xbox version, because there's no haptic feedback for the controllers or any other thing they've made for it. So yeah, if you played Call of Duty up to this point, the next Call of Duty would be lesser of a Call of Duty experience on PlayStation. Now, obviously, they're also making that their own problem because they don't want to share it because it's going to their competitor. If it was another person that didn't make consoles, they wouldn't have an issue, but the person that they now owns the company now owns their competitor. So, right? So it's a catch-22, man. It's like, you're going to make a lesser version of the game. They're like, no, we're not. We're going to make the same version of the game, but you're just not going to have the version of that game when it comes out because you're not giving us the dev kit. So basically they get the dev kit way after the fact. But I do find this interesting, though, Lono, that companies all the time, if they want to get the technology, right, they just go buy the actual gadget and break it down and figure out what the hell it is, right? I mean, Chinese companies do that all the time with certain products, right? So, yes, in the boardroom, you're like, we can't give them this dev kit because if they get this, they'll get our secrets. But as soon as you put that out into the market, they could literally break the code down. They can break the controller down. They can break anything down to figure out what it is. So if they really wanted to make that game work for that system, they could if they wanted to, right? So them saying that they don't want the industry secrets of the dev kit going out, it's only up to a certain point before it hits market. You see what I'm saying? Once it hits market, the secret's out.
Right, but that's the whole point, is if you have access to all of my intellectual property before it hits the market, you can completely craft your own marketing, your own plans, your own strategy around what I'm trying to do. You can undercut me. So sure, once it's in the market, you could then go buy one from the store and take it apart. I'm sure that's happened, but that's not the point. The point is, if you get it ahead of time, you can hurt me competitively. That's damaging to me.
Sure, but at the same time, who's to say that they're going to make a Call of Duty year one when PlayStation 6 comes out? You see what I'm saying?
Well, that would be the point, though, is you send the dev kits to the developers as soon as the dev kits are available. And if the developer...
Which is usually 18 months before it comes out.
Right, and so that's just standard practice. They would have to wait. They'd be like, we can't send it to Activision until it's in the market, and that's damaging to their relationship. That was their argument. That was his argument. Was that's damaging our relationship with them, and that's damaging to the consumer because then the consumer gets less product from us.
Sure, but at the same time, is it worth their 50% of their population or 40% of the population on Xbox is playing Call of Duty, and then that number they gave was 1 million people just playing Call of Duty on PlayStation? I mean, if Sony looks at that number and goes, well, is it worth them getting to this, or do we lose that? Because if it is degradation, they're forcing the degradation on themselves because they have an option to give it to them. And I understand business-wise they don't want to give it to them because that would hurt them in the long run. But at the same time, there is options to do it. I mean, you see what I'm saying? So they're making a lesser product for themselves because they don't want to share the stuff. They have a choice.
Right, they have a choice between damage me this way or damage me that way. That's the problem.
Yeah, right now, though, does that Xbox have a controller that's like a haptic feedback for the stuff? You see what I'm saying?
It's not about that. It's about the console itself. I either damage myself by giving you my intellectual property before it's in the market. That's standard practice. Nobody's going to do that. iPhone's not going to do it. Nobody wants their competitor to know their hardware plans. I either damage myself by...
You don't think there's any leakage whatsoever how Xbox and PlayStation, every time they come out with a console, they're almost close to each other? Like, there's no way that they each know what each other's working on.
I mean, again, that's neither here nor there. Like, if you're going to force me, if I'm put into the position where I have to willingly damage my own intellectual property and my plans, or I don't do that, and then I have to take an inferior product as a result, like they're put between either choice is damaging. They just have to choose which one, and I think they would probably choose to not send the dev kits because they would say, it's far more valuable. Look at their dominance this generation alone. Look at what Microsoft did to themselves with the Series S and all of their promises about Project Scarlet. PlayStation's blowing them out of the water, and rightfully so, because Microsoft completely misled the community and the culture about like what we were going to be getting from the Xbox this generation. They told us this, and that's not what we got. We were told Project Scarlet, we were told next gen, all this performance, and they were actually planning on launching the Series S as their main console. That was the plan all along. The Series X has never been a priority.
I mean, I just look at it as if we're talking about year one of PlayStation, yes, the first Call of Duty year one that comes out would be a lesser model of it, but the following year would be back to normal, right? So that would be Sony's choice to forego that first, and they would lose a lot of money,
sure.
Apparently, unless the player base that loves Call of Duty is just infatuated with Call of Duty, and they would pick it up, right? I mean, if you have a lot of people that just play Call of Duty for what it is, and they don't care, the haptic feedback or not the haptic feedback. They were playing Call of Duty way before the controllers for the PlayStation 5 were out, It's
not about the haptic feedback, it's about optimization. We all know that if the game launches and it's poorly optimized on the PlayStation in the first couple of weeks, and it's optimized better on Xbox, that's a humongous damage to the brand. It's like, well, why would I play this over here? It's running like crap. They're going to spend less money.
But does Sony think, though, the people that buy the PlayStation 6s would all of a sudden go, well, Call of Duty is not running optimal over here, they're going to go spend $500 on the next Xbox, whatever?
It could do that because it could shake consumer confidence in the hardware. They could think there's something wrong with the PS6. It's crap. It's bad. The game runs bad. That would make them less prone and less confident to buy more peripherals, to buy more accessories, to spend more microtransactions. If you buy a brand new console and you're a Call of Duty player and it runs poorly, you got to think like a gamer. The gamer's not going to be like, well, I mean, surely this is related to the Activision Blizzard deal and the fact that I couldn't get my dev kit over there fast enough. They're going to be like, this runs like crap. And that harms loyalty. That harms Sony's relationship with the consumer. That harms the consumer at that point. That's the point. That harms the consumer. It's like, I got an inferior product because you guys bought an independent company that should have stayed independent. The company staying independent is better for the consumer is kind of the point that I'm trying to make. That's better for the consumer in the end.
Yeah, but I just look at it's just one game, right? It's just one game that's not going to have optimization for that first year. Once that first year is done, and Call of Duty is a game that comes out yearly, right? So it would be that one first year of Call of Duty that would be unoptimized and worse version. After that, it would be exactly the same, if not better, on the PlayStation system.
Again, you would hope, because they'll adopt first, better, and best. So who do you think's getting priority in the patch pipeline? I mean,
the first year, Microsoft would have a better Call of Duty, and that might move people over to Xbox. But I doubt it, because if the people are bleeding blue, they're going to stay with it and go, you know what, that Call of Duty that year sucks balls, and I didn't like to play that game.
I wasn't arguing that they would be in mass exodus. It's that it would be damaging to the consumer as well as damaging to Sony. Like, that would be the reverberation of that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it would be degradation for that first title that comes out for that system.
Then Bobby Kotick taking the stand, I actually didn't think he said much that was that, to me, tectonic, other than he admitted it was a bad judgment to not put Call of Duty on the Switch. He kind of underestimated the Switch. He thought because the prototypes didn't convince him it would be very successful, and he kind of admitted, that was a mistake. But he also admitted that he didn't know anything about this deal, that Activision hasn't been approached. They don't know anything about Call of Duty going to the Switch. But he also kind of doubled down on the fact that they would never put their game on Game Pass day and date. He thinks it's a bad business decision. But then obviously they pressed him on saying, okay, so if you're thinking that it's a bad business decision, why would you be okay with this merger then? And he basically said that he had 98% of his shareholders in favor of this, and he has a responsibility to the shareholders, right? What do you think about the juxtaposition of our property is so good, so valuable, you could never write us a check big enough to put it on, a subscription service. He doesn't even see it as a good business decision even after day and date. It's just like, and Jim Ryan seems to confirm, we knew he would always reject it. But then it's also like, but we're going to go through this buyout, and then all this stuff's going to end up on Game Pass, right?
Right. But if it was up to Bobby, and Bobby doesn't want to put it on Game Pass, but once Bobby sells his company, it's no longer up to Bobby, right? Bobby's decisions of what he wants are on Game Pass or not on Game Pass is moot. It's about the overlords, Microsoft, what they want to do with the brand. So yeah, if he stays separate, then yeah, he doesn't want on the Game Pass. He doesn't agree with the Game Pass model. But at the same time, if he sells his company, which he wanted to do, hence why we're in this situation in the first place, it's not up to Bobby at that point once it's sold.
Yeah, and I think that's just an interesting juxtaposition. He's like, yeah, I would never do that, but yeah, I'm gonna let them buy it and do it.
Yeah, buy it, and they can do what they want with it.
That's their problem. That's their problem once they buy it. Now, somebody's asking me, Gilly's saying, is Xbox going to get an inferior version of Destiny or Marathon from Bungie? Well, Bungie operates independently, so I actually think their relationship with Xbox, you send the dev kit and say you operate independently, you can therefore sign an NDA. Activision can't sign an NDA when they're owned. They're not independent. Like, Bungie operates independently underneath Sony's operating agreement. So I don't know if they would be...
Until they're not.
Right, until they're not. I think under the current contract and the current agreement, Bungie would be able to sign an NDA with Microsoft. I don't think Activision could do that because Activision's not operating independently under this merger. They get acquired. That's it. There's no operating independently.
But even if they're higher independently, Sony still can't they go over there and see what Xbox has got going on because Bungie's got it. You know what I'm saying? I
don't have an exhaustive answer. I'm saying there's the possibility because their contract allows them to operate independently. It even says all future Bungie property will be multi-platform. Like, Sony wasn't interested in absorbing them. They want the live service expertise. They're having them spearhead the center of live service excellence or whatever it's called.
But didn't Microsoft also say that Call of Duty was going to be multi-platform?
Right, but not per the terms of the contract. It's a behavioral commitment, and there is no per terms in the contract that Activision's will operate independently. That's not.
So
that's
couldn't
different.
Sony though? Couldn't Sony, instead of saying that we can't give them our dev kit because of this, couldn't they sign a deal saying, hey, if you sign this deal, Activision cannot any kind of foreclose any kind of information that we're giving to this company? Couldn't they do the exact same thing if Bungie, I know it's not independently or not, couldn't they do the exact same thing?
They could attempt to do that. I just wonder if Activision would say we can't sign that because we no longer operate independently. We are literally owned by Microsoft. We're We're not on our own anymore. So again, it depends on what the ownership contract stipulates. Could Activision sign that NDA? I don't know. If they could, I think Microsoft's lawyers would have said that. Well, per this merger, that's not a Jim Ryan's point would have been shattered if the lawyers would have said, per this acquisition agreement, Activision would be able to sign an NDA with you and not share those details with Microsoft.
Well, that would also be saying that because right now Bobby Kotick said they signed these deals with Nintendo and all these other things, and they don't even know, they don't have the right to do that, right? So technically, they don't have the right to actually even say what you just said, where they would sign a contract like that. So basically, what I'm saying though is they could do the same type of contract, and it would just be fine. But they just assume that as soon as Microsoft buys this company, that they're not going to do that, and they're not going to like this. I find it in bad taste of Sony saying that they're taking away the game from us, and then Microsoft comes out and says we're not taking the game away from you, and then they say, well, if we give them this, then they're going to be in bad terms and make a degradation of our game to make a downgraded game of this, and they're like, well, we wouldn't do that because you would share and they're like, we're not going to share that with you. So they move the goalpost a little bit every single time, and obviously they have the right to do that because of the business, right? But I just find it weird that one company that they own is going to do what they say the other company's not going to do, which is they're independent, and Bungie can make those on their independent contracts for the other companies for multi-platform. Microsoft has said if they have Call of Duty, it is going to be multi-platform. Yes, they haven't stated if it's going to be independent and whatnot, but they could make that deal, and then everything would be fine, wouldn't it?
But again, I don't think the issue is whether or not Bungie could do it or not, or whether or not Activision could do it or not. The argument is what it would do to consumers, because Call of Duty is so endemic. That's 48% of the people who buy Call of Duty would be harmed. Marathon's not in the market. There is no Marathon consumer. And I mean, I guess you could argue Destiny is in the market, and Bungie being owned by Sony could harm whatever Microsoft plans to make off of Destiny. But again, it's not endemic to Microsoft's ecosystem or revenue streams. It's not the quantity of consumers. Because there was a big sticking point in this case where the judge was saying you have to be able to argue a certain percentage point to argue harm to the consumer. And you couldn't argue that with the size of Destiny, and Marathon's not out yet.
Yeah, but Sony also had a problem with cross-platform, right? Because they said cross-platform would hurt their sales and whatnot. And then they decided that they would go cross-platform, and did their sales go down? No, I think actually their sales picked up, didn't they?
They only agreed to cross-platform with Fortnite when Fortnite agreed to give them a better revenue share because they made Fortnite more money than all the other platforms.
They did it with Microsoft, with Minecraft.
I don't know how that deal was brokered, but I know when they brokered the deal with Fortnite, they literally leveraged the fact that they made way more money for Fortnite and said, we will not agree to crossplay unless you give us better revenue share on this.
Yeah, well, right, but they made a contract saying that, and that's why they did what they did. So why can't they make a contract saying, hey, I mean, Microsoft wants it on as many platforms as possible because they're paying $70 billion. They want to make that money back as fast as possible. That's what a business wants to do. So they're not, one, taking away Call of Duty from PlayStation or any other. They want to put it as many platforms as possible because they want to recoup that money as fast as possible. So why wouldn't Microsoft agree to a deal if Sony decided they wanted to make a deal like that? You see what I'm saying? I feel like they're saying that this is going to hurt us, but then they make deals where it doesn't hurt them, and this is where they get a better percentage for Fortnite. They get, I don't know the deal for Minecraft, but they worked it out. They worked it out, and they all still kumbaya, both in the industry, both making money off certain things, right? And they still haven't even updated the Minecraft for PlayStation 5 yet because they don't want to share the stuff. So it's a downgraded game on the PlayStation because you're playing the Minecraft PlayStation 4 edition on the PlayStation 5 because they don't want to share the dev kit stuff.
Right. I think we're getting lost in the weeds here. This isn't necessarily about Sony, though. Sony is just the touchstone point to talk about Call of Duty because the number of consumers that are on Sony, right? Like, I think we're going to the wrong end of the telescope. Like, it isn't about, exclusivity taken away from Sony. Even Jim Ryan admitted, he said, I wasn't really concerned. I don't even think this is about exclusivity. He says, I think this is a bigger strategy. He said that in the court documents. He was fine until Phil Spencer's counter proposal came across the desk, and it was like, where is Diablo 4? Where's Overwatch 2? What the frick is this? Like, and we haven't even seen the full scope of that email yet. Like, basically, he said, well, yeah, I was fine until he sent this email back, and so I was like, wait a minute, what? No. And so focusing too much on Sony, I think, is part of the problem. It's about Microsoft betrayed through these emails, and Kotick, that's why I didn't find what Kotick said that interesting, other than him being like, I would never put it on Game Pass, and I'm okay with this deal. Right. It's more about they've been exposed for the real plan, not just with ZeniMax, but with Activision. The models themselves and the plans themselves has been, we've tested out Foreclosure. Now, Foreclosure doesn't have to be immediate. I don't think anybody thought, I didn't think, that they were immediately just going to rip Call of Duty from PlayStation. That was never the thought. It was that they kept pushing for a 10-year contract. I think there's a reason for that. I think that they know in 10 years' time, they could implement a total different strategy and plan if they properly play this out, especially with cloud and especially with mobile. They could start to weather the loss with mobile as far as them looking and saying, well, how much do we need to make on Game Pass if we lose money over there on Sony? They've already scoped it out. In 10 years, those losses could be less severe because they're making it up in other ways.
Well, right. I mean, and Sony is pivoting right now. That's why they picked up Bungie. This is why they're making live service games. This is why they're making the change, because if they're saying if Call of Duty moves, then we're going to lose a bunch of money, but they're pivoting now to make other games for their player base, right? That could be just as big as Call of Duty in the next 10 years. Obviously, Call of Duty, is it going to maintain what it is right now, a monster for the next 10 years? It could, but it also could downgrade, right? Real quick, was this CR Burn? You said Minecraft is not Call of Duty. You're right. It's like 10 times the size of it. You're absolutely correct. Yeah, it's not Call of Duty. So your statement towards me saying that Minecraft is not Call of Duty, Minecraft is literally 10 times the size of Call of Duty. You're absolutely correct. You're trying to own me on something, but I understand. Minecraft is much bigger than Call of Duty, much more widespread than Call of Duty, and they made deals work around the actual software in the game.
Yeah, I think the financial incentive to keep products like Minecraft and Call of Duty on PlayStation are well in hand. I've always argued that. I think people always forget that from the very beginning I said I don't think they could afford to take these games off. I actually believe them when they say that, then when they're like, the financial loss, they would be, that's the thing I think people forget, is if the Activision Blizzard deal goes through, Microsoft is suddenly very financially dependent on Sony. That's one of the more interesting things that would play out from this. It's not about, oh, we're suddenly going to rip everything off and do foreclosure strategy. I think ZeniMax proves they can find a way to model it and do it. If it takes longer, fine. If it takes longer, that's the issue. Because Zubair's saying, well, if it takes 10 years, I'd be hesitant to say that that's harmful to the consumer. I would argue that it is harmful to the consumer if the digital library consistency that Phil Spencer's talked about, and I buy a PlayStation 6, or you have all these people buying into the PlayStation 6, right? And they move into the next generation, because that was something they were really focusing on, next generation, what would happen at that point. If that's the case, and this starts to harm those decisions, and the consumers have less choice, and the products have been harmed long term, then you have merit to your case. The FTC could argue that's the plan, is that once you hit that generation, now we're in a harmful environment where you've basically slowly gone foreclosure, and you've made it up with mobile, you've made it up with Game Pass. I don't think people think about it in those terms. A foreclosure strategy doesn't have to be an immediacy. It's not a lever that they pull.
Right.
They did it with ZeniMax, which is, I think, why people think, oh, that's what you're worried's going to happen. It's like, no, I think, like I said, Jim Ryan even said, this strategy is much bigger than just immediately going exclusivity. Like, oh, yeah, we're just going to make everything exclusive. It's like, you can't afford to do that. It would be mutual destruction.
Market game crash coming? I don't think so.
No, but I definitely think I think people are going to be in for a wake-up call if this deal goes through. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot of studios shuttered and a lot of projects canceled. They'll be more dependent on mobile and the big titles. They won't care about the smaller projects and the smaller studios. They're not necessary.
You know what I said the other day on my stream? I was like, it'd be funny if, because Bobby Kotick is such a nice guy. I thought it would be funny. I know that Sony makes a crap ton of money, and so does Microsoft, but wouldn't it be great after this deal, if it doesn't go through, that Microsoft doesn't get them, that Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft all decide that they're just going to boycott Activision. They're just not going to let them on any platform. Just like, yeah, sorry. Have fun with your Call of Duty and see what happens with your ego over there.
Well, I don't think anybody could afford to do that either, because I think when he threw his weight around to get his higher revenue share, it's like,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. But it would be funny if there was like, yeah, we're not going to put Call of Duty on the next PlayStation or whatever. Like, wait, what do you mean?
Right, and I think that gets lost in the conversation too. Is that these publishers, they wield their weight, and everybody wants to blame Microsoft and Sony, and it's like. And these publishers know, it's like, you need us. You need our games. Like, we're out here trying to make money too, you know? And a lot of these publishers are the ones that broker the deal. It's not even the developers a lot of the times. It's the publishers that broker these deals with these platforms because they know. They're like, hey, our property is worth a lot. And Bobby knew. He knew he could go to Xbox and say, you're going to give us a better revenue share or I'm taking the freaking game. And they were like... You gonna call his bluff, or do you want to do that?
I mean, Bobby's getting $3 billion regardless of what happens. So,
I don't agree with the people that think he's trying to sabotage it. I think he's kind of trying to spin both plates. It's like he has to keep his shareholders happy. Like, hey, if this deal doesn't go through, we're gonna be all right? We're gonna get $3 billion.
Lono.
But I also think he wants the deal to go through. I don't think he's trying to sabotage it.
Come on, this is the guy who said there was no problems at his company in an email, and he threatened to kill somebody. Right? Come on, come on.
He didn't threaten to kill her. He said he could have her killed. I'm pretty sure. Let's be fair to what he actually said. No, I truly don't think he's trying to sabotage the deal, though. I think he's trying to spin both plates. He has to make sure that he wants the deal to go through because it'll make his shareholders happy. Sure. But if the deal doesn't go through, he needs his shareholders to know, like, hey, we're still getting $3 billion out of this, okay? Like, we're okay no matter what. We'll be fine. But the most recent stuff that we need to come over was the CFO statements and then the closing arguments, okay? So we're kind of all caught up here. I tried to pull out the high points. This was not an exhaustive recap, guys. This is just kind of a...
Yes. There's plenty of videos out there. Go watch the past broadcast of Lono, what he did with all the stuff that he's done.
Yeah, I did my best to make sure... we covered everything kind of as it developed. Now, the CFO, to me, really, really helped the merits of FTC's case. Again, to restate it, the FTC's not trying to block. They're trying to establish merits of their case and that they could win based on those merits. And so the CFO basically makes it clear that they were modeling for foreclosure of ZeniMax and told the regulators we didn't have any financial, incentive to do this. They go back on this. We're retreading a little bit. We touched on this a little bit ago. And then he makes it clear that even he was surprised. He was sort of like, wow. Because apparently Phil Spencer sets everybody down. They meet with ZeniMax. And the ZeniMax executives, they were against this. They were like, there's going to be backlash. This will be bad. We don't want this to happen. So you go back and read Todd Howard's blog announcing this deal. He's like, this is like our original agreement. This is not about one system. So I think this is a big rug pull on ZeniMax. They were sold a bill of goods. They were convinced, we're not going to do that. And then they do it anyway, which is all of that gives cause for concern. Like, Microsoft's talking a really big game here about all these things they will and won't do. I don't think they can be trusted at all. So Phil Spencer walks in the room, says, this is what we're doing. We're going all exclusive, to the point that, the CFO says that he said, wow. And they asked him about that. They said, he said, not just new IP, but all games going forward. Wow. And they said, you said this because this was a big decision. And he said, I suppose so. When you look at this when this transpired and you look at the FTC, do you think this adds merits to the FTC to say we need to look further here? Because all these models that have entertained foreclosure and losing money on Sony and trying to recoup it on Game Pass, does this add merit that they did this with ZeniMax, or do you think it's unrelated?
I mean, I look at it as how long does a company have to buy a third party before it becomes their first party stuff, right? Like, how long do they have to do, or are they never allowed to make anything exclusive once they own that company, even though they were third party beforehand? I don't know if that's what they're looking at, is that they can never make any of the games that Bethesda ZeniMax works on ever exclusive. This is how I feel like they're pushing it, right? Where I feel like in this case of Phil Spencer, I think this was a case by case, and then it became it's official, like everything's exclusive, because like Nadal said, that we don't want to be exclusive, but we have to because of the industry leader. And those are facts, right? Sony is the industry leader, and they want to compete in that space, so they have to make exclusive. So then we take that from exclusive. How and when are they allowed to make? Are they allowed to make Elder Scrolls 6 exclusive? Is that far enough down the road? That would be 5 years, 6 years after the purchase. If it comes out in 2026, 2027, would they be okay if they made it exclusive? And I'm asking you as like the FTC, like, are they looking where no matter what game, because they bought ZeniMax, none of those games are ever allowed to be exclusive for Xbox? You see what I'm saying?
That's not what was stated. Yeah, we're getting lost because there's been so many things that have happened and stated.
You're saying that if Phil Spencer decided if this was supposed to be exclusive or not exclusive, that's what you asked me.
So what happened is they told the regulators they had no financial incentive to do it with ZeniMax. They would do it on a case-by-case basis. So it did seem like there would be games that would be exclusive. Like, that's not the problem. It was that we'll do it case-by-case. And I think ZeniMax was told the same thing. We'll do it case-by-case because they've got games in progress. As soon as the ink is dry, Phil Spencer's like, no. Any and all future, it's ours. It's exclusive. They amend the Indiana Jones contract. They halt production of PS5 version of Redfall. And then obviously they completely change direction for Starfield. So I'm simply asking, is this relevant to them making basically the exact same assurances with the Activision deal?
Yes, it is relevant because obviously it's a freshly bought company, right? And just a few months the email was what, February of 2022. I forget when the meeting was or whatever it was. It was shortly after, a couple months after they bought the Bethesda, right? Or
in November of 2021, they were told that everything would be exclusive.
Right. So and it went through in March, did it not? Something like that.
My brain's mush after this week. I don't remember the exact timeline.
I think it was like 6 or 7 months afterwards that they decided to make it exclusive. So yeah, it's relevant and it's pertinent because if they buy this company, how short afterwards all of a sudden they change their mind, just like they did with ZeniMax, as can it go exclusive? And then my pushback was, well, how long can they go after they buy a company before they can decide to make games exclusive, even though they said it would be a case-by-case scenario, right? So
I don't think it has to be even a matter of time. I just think my frustration with it is, if that's what you want to do, if that's what you've modeled for, that should have been divulged. You shouldn't say there's no incentive. Like, Phil Spencer says in interviews, there's no model for us to take it off of PlayStation. But that's not true. They modeled what it would look like to take Call of Duty off of PlayStation. They've modeled it. They've looked into it, which means it could happen. As you're saying,
sure.
When can they? Well, I don't know. I don't know. Whenever it's financially viable is when they'll do it. That's the point. It can be financially viable for them to do it and damaging to consumers. That's the concern of this case.
Yeah, the point here's my outlook of it. It wouldn't go exclusive until they had a majority of the population on their Game Pass platform. When they hits that number that they want to hit on Game Pass, that's when they decide, yeah, from now on, we're making Call of Duty exclusive, right? Like that's the number. When the money shows the signs, like if they did the research, which they said they did, and they did modeled numbers, they're like, well, we can't make Call of Duty exclusive yet because 50% of the population or 48% of the population plays it on our competitor. So we can't do it yet. So let's sign a 10-year deal, and we'll come back to this 10 years later and see if the market has switched and if we need them anymore. This is why I think behind the doors, that's why they're like, all right, let's give them 10 years. And Sony's like, we don't like your deal. We want it longer. We want it more because we want to make sure that we're not irrelevant down the line. So I do believe that they potentially could make it exclusive, and that's their right. But at this point, at the FTC, what they're trying to say is, yes, look, what they did with ZeniMax, they can do it again with Call of Duty, and it doesn't have to be 10 years. It could be 2. It just so happens that what Bethesda sells and what Call of Duty sells are 2 different things, right? There's a lot more money in Call of Duty. You would have to make multiple games. I mean, Skyrim has sold 60 million copies, and that took over a decade. where Call of Duty is selling 30 million, 40 million copies a year. So there's a difference.
Mo says, how's it damaging? It's just another choice that has to be made by consumers. Again, I feel like a lot of you guys don't understand the case. The case is if consumers have to go and spend that kind of money, and we're getting to closing arguments here, which is very relevant, that's damaging to the consumer. If I have to go buy another box for $500 or a PC gaming rig, that's damaging to the consumer. So again, you're not paying attention to the case if you have to ask that question. That's literally the point, is that if you do this level of vertical foreclosure, customers lose choice and have to spend more money or have to divert all of their... Imagine what Phil Spencer said suddenly being super relevant, that if you have to maintain your digital library and suddenly that's disrupted because you're like, well, I have to go over here if I want to play this game, that is damage to the consumer. That's quite literally what this case rests on. The merits of this case is we get this preliminary injunction if we can prove that not only we can win by the merits, but like it's very clear this will be damaging to the consumer, damaging to the market. And subsequently, yes, that does mean damaging to Sony, because that's what leads to damage to the consumer, is you lose those choices or you get a lesser quality product because of an acquisition that, again, I haven't seen... What's amazing to me today, not a single person has put an argument in chat that is in favor of the deal that's not driven by fandom. I've not seen anybody walk through an economic argumentation that this will lead to this. It's all been, it's good for us because we get more games on Game Pass. That's not an economic argument of, oh, this is going to be healthier for the consumer base. It's going to be healthier for the market. It's because you like Xbox. Like, I haven't been compelled yet that COD is not a necessity. Again, that's to be determined. That's actually not required for the merits of the case. The FTC pushed back on that. They said we don't have to establish that it's a necessity. We just have to establish that consumers are harmed. That's all they have to establish for the merits of the case.
I think if I was a COD super fan and I bought the PlayStation knowing, okay, well, COD's great on PlayStation, and then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I hear this thing going through. Is Microsoft going to buy them? Is COD leaving? They're like, no, COD's not leaving. You're like, all right, great. I'm going to buy a PlayStation 5 now or PlayStation 6. And then all of a sudden, I get a PlayStation 6. And then right after I buy it, they go, oh, by the way, Microsoft made Call of Duty exclusive for Microsoft. And you're like, oh, right? And they spent their hard-earned money on it. And that's understandable. People are allowed to get upset and stuff like that. So to say it's the consumers, they're listening. Again, we are in the know here in this channel. Like in chat, the average consumer doesn't even know the case is going on. Let's be honest, right? They have no idea the case is going on, and they're going to buy where they feel the game is. And there'll be a point down the line they'll be like, wait a minute, I can't get Call of Duty on PlayStation. Why not? Right? And this is the reason why it hurts consumers.
Well, and someone saying that the judge had to remind them that this was about Sony and not the consumer. And again, I think that
it's about consumers, not Sony.
Sorry, did I say that backwards?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm scrolling through my document to try to find that section. Yes, she had to correct them, but again, it's not that simplistic. It simply isn't that simplistic, because the judge says it's not the harm to Sony we care about, it's the harm to consumers. Right. That's so reductionist. If you harm Sony in the ways that the FTC is arguing, you harm consumers. The FTC came back from the break and said, it's clear we're not here to help Sony, but to help consumers. If Sony feels they have to deprive dev kits to Microsoft for a Microsoft-owned Call of Duty, that hurts consumers. Like, again, cherry-picking moments and micro moments to act like, oh yeah, the FTC is just here for Sony. It's such a reductionist view of this. They have to argue about harm to Sony, because if they don't argue harm to Sony, they can't substantiate harm to consumer. It's a both and. You can't go in and just purely talk about the consumer. It's not that clean cut, right? Just want to confirm we're saying the judge has a simplistic understanding of the issues. No, I'm saying that quote is not her saying this is all that matters. Sony doesn't matter at all. She's saying our primary concern is the consumer. She doesn't have a simplistic understanding of it. I think people hear her saying it and they have a simplistic understanding of it. It's like she's just establishing it, like that's not what we're really doing here, right? It's not the harm to Sony that we care about, right? It's harm to consumers. That's what we're doing in this case, is what she's saying.
It's also different when you read it on a piece of paper or on the website and then hear in context on how she said it and what she said, right? So it's not as clean cut as she's literally telling, because the FTC, the way they were doing it was it sounded more like they were pushing towards Sony than the consumers, and that's why she was kind of reminding them, we're not here for Sony, we're here for the consumers. They still have to make the point by, she was just letting them know that make sure you're talking about, sell it to me, right? Because that's what they're doing. Their job is to sell it to her on how is this going to affect consumers, not Sony. And the way they were coming across, they were coming across more of trying to save Sony's ass than they were the customer's ass.
And I don't think people even realize what they're saying sometimes. Mo says they need to worry about the consumers, not the companies. Sony's the market leader. They don't matter. Do you understand what you just said? You just said they're the market leader, which means what? They're attached to a ton of consumers. They don't matter? Like, if you damage Sony as the market leader, they're attached to way more consumers. Ergo, that damages the very thing that this case is concerned about. Like, you just inadvertently argued the merits of the case. If you damage a market leader and their subsequent consumers, you just damaged a ton of people. You just harmed the market and the consumers attached to it. So you can't hand wave this. Oh, they're the market leader, they don't matter. They're the market leader, which means they're attached to more consumers. So, as it came to a close, it came down to this 20% thing. They couldn't find the 20%, and then they finally found the page number. So that's obviously going to be up to the judge to decide whether or not that has been substantiated, that 20% shift will happen, because that she basically told them this is pivotal for your case. And the FTC didn't look very good here because they couldn't find it. And they were fumbling around, and she made mention of this at the end. She said, she appreciated them keeping up. She acknowledged they don't have the resources that private attorneys do, but they didn't look so hot here. But they did finally provide her with the page number for the 20% in this model. I think that's going to be a pivotal moment, is that she goes that specific page number and she's compelled that, okay, this has been articulated well. Now, what did you think about...
What was that 20%? What was that number for the 20%?
That they're arguing that there's a potential 20% shift in the market if this goes through, and that 20% shift would be so damaging to Sony, damaging to that many consumers, that grants merits to the case.
Okay.
And then she wanted that 20% explained. Microsoft's lawyers were claiming that it was never explained. They said, yes, it is explained. They just couldn't find the page number. They finally found the page number, and then they moved on. Like, they moved on to markets. So the other sticking point before we kind of land this plane was she was under the assumption that most PlayStation 5 owners have a PC gaming rig in their house that they could just play Call of Duty on. Now,
she said specifically gaming rig?
She said a PC to play Call of Duty on. So the lawyers in this case kind of had to educate her on a PC. A gaming PC is an expensive thing. It's a special thing. Right. It's not something that everybody has in the home. And a lot of people who own a PS5, that's where they game. They don't have like a backup PC just to play games on. So that's another sticking point, I think, that hopefully they were able to compel her, because she can't be educated about every single sector, every single piece of every, like Zubair made the point this morning. She's going to go from talking about this merger to, pig farmers. Like, she can't be educated about every single economic sector. So the hope would be is that FTC compelled her to be like, yeah, that's not how it works. That the market is not flooded with people with gaming rigs oh, I can't play this on PS5. No worries. I'll just go play on my gaming rig that I already have. That's generally not how it works. Do you have any thoughts on that? On the fact that like she thought that like everybody had a gaming rig in their home, they just go play Call of Duty there.
Didn't she say a comment, something along the lines? And again, I glanced through it. Didn't she say something about because everyone was home on Zoom that she just assumed that everyone had a computer or something like that?
Oh, is that how she substantiated the assumption that like, well, they're on Zoom, so?
Yeah, I think she. Don't quote me. I remember something along the lines of her saying something along. When people were home, they were using Zoom, so she then antiquated that as people had PCs. Maybe someone in chat can double check that.
Because, well, she mentioned the sickie. She mentioned, like, when everybody was at home because of the sickie. So maybe she was making that connection between, like, the explosion of Zoom.
Right, the explosion of Zoom, yeah.
Right. No,
I
that
think that's
makes
what she was
sense.
doing.
That makes sense why she might think that. Again, a lot of people could be using Zoom on a laptop or, a weak PC that can't play these games.
Right. So I think as and again, I'm not the judge, but I would assume that she thought that PCs are PCs and all PCs could probably play gaming. And that's why I asked at the very beginning, did she say gaming PCs? Yeah, gaming PC is completely different than, $400, Chromebook that you're getting. You're not going to, you could try to play video games on that, but it's going to be a struggle. Yeah, I just think, again, she can't be educated on all the stuff. I mean, but at the same time, that's a big assumption that everyone owns a PC, especially a gaming PC. And if someone's complaining about a $500 console, they're definitely not going out to buy a $1,200 low tier gaming PC at $1,100, $1,200. You know what I mean? That's a big jump to go. Am I going to get a PlayStation 5, an Xbox Series X, or am I going to get a $1,500 PC? So that's a small portion of the market.
Right, and people need to remember that, if you're going to shop competitively, you'd have to build it yourself, and most consumers aren't going to want to do that. And again, the precedent is if they have to go buy more equipment just to keep playing this game, that's harm to the consumer. So even if you bargain shop a PC, it's no different than having to buy the Xbox. She was under the assumption they wouldn't have to go and buy new hardware. They'd just be able to buy the game on PC. They wouldn't need to go get an Xbox.
See, but I always look at this as a consumer, and I own all the systems except a PlayStation 5 at this time. I have a choice on what I want to go buy, right? And if I'm a gamer, I'm going to buy where I want to play the game. So if I didn't own a console or didn't own a PC, and then a game came out and I said, this is the best experience, obviously, if I had the money, I would probably go with the higher tier stuff because I would play on PC. But if I didn't have that much money, then I would pick a console. And then based on your console picks, you would pick based on where your friends are playing. If you already had a friend that had a PlayStation, then you would probably buy a PlayStation. If you had a friend that had an Xbox, you'd probably buy an Xbox, right? If you have no friends, then you have an open market. And as a consumer, you get to choose if you want to play PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, or PC. So I always, when they say it's going to hurt consumers, I always just look at it and go, well, the consumers, as long as they're educated and have the money, they can make whatever choice they want. And I don't really feel like that's a bad thing for consumers. Consumers have choice, and there are choices here, right? There are choices on what you want to play and where you want to play them.
It's about the degree, though, of what pain and harm would happen. It's you obviously, when exclusive deals are struck and this kind of thing happens, there's a certain degree where it's like, well, if you want to play that game, you have to go over there now, right? So it's,
right, you've already invested in this side. Now you have to go invest more side. All right.
That's where people, I think, get lost a little bit on it, too, is it's about degrees. That's why she kept sticking on that 20%. That was really pivotal to their argument, is this degree of harm would be significant. We're not talking about a very small percentage of the market. We're talking about a chunk of the consumer base.
Well, they are, though, talking about a certain percent of the market because they're only talking about the people that own a PlayStation in that argument. Because if they have a PlayStation and they're taking something away, then they would have to go buy a PC or Xbox, right? That's what they're saying. They're not saying that if
right.
So, I mean, there's
the merits of the case are not diminished by the number of consumers in the world. It can only be within the market that they're discussing and considering. Like if you took this to any other market, it would only consider the market of people in that market. It wouldn't be, well, there's this many people in the world, so this is a drop in the bucket. Like that wouldn't diminish the merits of the case.
I know, but just like, for instance, like how many people are leaving? Someone said earlier in the chat that they've sold their Xbox Series X because of the, they just don't want it anymore because there's not 60 frames per second on Xbox X, but a lot of people are getting rid of their X. Is that hurting consumers? They're selling their boxes and moving over to another console because that's their choice. So I don't know. It's when you're looking at the industry leader, that's what, 3 to 1 are they right now? 3 to 1 Sony over Microsoft, something like that.
It's pretty significant, yeah. PS5's market saturation is set to surpass the PS4, and Series X and S are set to stay on pace with the Xbox One era. So it's not that the hardware distribution's not looking good. It's not surprising at all that Xbox is not concerned with console. Like this plan, that came out in Phil Spencer's deposition, is that this plan is not to accelerate console at all. This is all about mobile and cloud.
Mobile, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just look at it is that if gamers want a game, they're gonna buy or sell and rebuy and do what they want. I think the majority of the market, I really believe that the majority of the market doesn't even care Like they don't know. They go to the store, they see PlayStation, they look at the back of the box, they go, oh, what games are on here? And then they buy the box because it looks cool. Their friend has it, or they're you know what I mean? Like that's the majority of how people buy consoles. Like mom and dad, when they're buying a video game system, you see the kids all the time on YouTube get frustrated because they got them a Series S instead of a PlayStation. And because the kids all pissed off now because they can't play with their friends or they don't have the cool box because the younger generation. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I always find it weird. Because yeah, it's going to hurt, but the saturation of the market is what 300 million or 400 million people play on consoles all across Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox, and they're just shifting around.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the last thing she said that I hope, again, they also were kind of able to educate her on is that she kind of believes games come and go like MySpace. She talked about how, like, Hogwarts Legacy was the biggest game this year, and now it's not anymore. And it's like, well, that's not how Call of Duty exists in the market. Right. It's not a prop-up game that can be surpassed all of a sudden, right? Even with how well Fortnite did, PUBG's still around and still cruising. Like, PUBG Mobile does amazing. So that was the last thing I hoped. I was like, well, hopefully the FTC lawyers did a good job kind of educating her. Like, that's not really how this works. And that would then be, again, the worry is that if this turns into vertical foreclosure, that many consumers would be affected. It's not about like, oh, well, another game will come out. It's like, well, but that's not the issue. Because you keep saying, well, consumers don't care. They're not tuned into this. Buddy, they'd be surprised and really care if all of a sudden they woke up one day and they couldn't get Call of Duty on their PlayStation 5 or 6. They'd be pretty ticked.
Yeah, I mean, but again, like everyone hated, and again, I haven't played Call of Duty, but based on reviews, was it Cold War? Cold War did terrible in the public eye of Call of Duties, but yet it still sold 30 million.
Well,
30 million copies.
Like Bobby Kotick said, he was like, yeah, Vanguard was disappointing, but it was still like the #1 game that year.
Yeah. The crappiest version of Call of Duty sold 30 million copies. You know what I mean?
Yeah. At the end of it, I think both the FTC lawyers and the Microsoft lawyers, they did a good job. I don't think this is slanted really heavily in one way. I think FTC uncovered enough to argue the merits of their case. I think the merits of the case, as well as the ability to win, would met out in discovery. I do. I think they'd win because it's like there's so much that we haven't even seen. I feel like we just saw the tip of the iceberg, and I hope that the judge is compelled to say the merits of this case is just to do the preliminary injunction, not to block. And I believe that the FTC has grounds to say there's way more here for us to uncover and investigate, especially since the judge agreed there were certain things that didn't happen. They didn't crunch the numbers on what Call of Duty would do on Switch or NVIDIA. These deals were just sort of used as a defense, and they didn't even crunch the numbers. That oddity, I think, adds merit that, like, this needs to be looked into and will subsequently lead to a block. Even Bobby himself said, we'll walk away if you give him the preliminary injunction, which doesn't add to merit to the case, by the way. That actually doesn't lead to a win. That's just Bobby sort of saying we have no idea if we have no intention of going forward with this if you grant it. So they have to argue merit, and then based on those merits that they can win. And I felt that the FTC did enough to grant that, but Microsoft made it hard on them. I do. Thanks for another gifted.
See,
go ahead.
You're going to ask me what do I think? I see that in the other way, based on what I've read and what we talked about. So many times did the FTC kind of feel like, and again, the context of the judge telling them we're not here for Sony, we're here for the consumers. It was multiple times. She got annoyed because it was happening so much throughout the trial, right? And I feel that alone kind of doesn't give them what's the word I'm looking credence to push it over to the preliminary, right? And that's just me based off of that. If they do go through, I could see it happening, and if it goes through, then that's basically it's over, right? Because Kotick with his threat said if it goes that far, we're backing out. So then Microsoft would lose anyway. So, but I don't think that the FTC did a very good job. I think they stumbled a lot. I think they were kind of flustered, trying to connect the points, so much so they called Elder Scrolls 16 coming out. So I think there was a lot of little things that they didn't sell the judge on it, and I don't think the judge, I think after the holiday break, I think was it next Wednesday is when they come out with the decision or something like that, at least by Wednesday or after Wednesday. So I don't know, it could go either way. I said this off the the membership thing last week. I said my gut feeling. This is not because I play on Xbox. My gut feeling is I still think it's going to go through.
Right, and Chapter 8 saying it's not that they might win. They have to prove based on merits that they're likely to win. And people are saying, and you're saying they stumbled around, they had a hard time. I think people need to remember this isn't television, right? Like, if they stumble...
Right, this is not Law and Order. Yeah, this is not Law and Order.
At the end of the day, I don't think the judge is going to say, well, they kind of stammered and it took them a while to find that page number. She's going to base it off of law and fact. Like, that's the point, is they delivered, I think, enough law and fact to say we're likely to win this. We uncovered enough that we're likely to win this case because there's merits to this. There's vertical foreclosure models. There's vertical foreclosure strategy and planning here, and ZeniMax is establishing that they did it once before. I think we watched this like an episode of Law and Order, and we were like, oh, man, FTC, they're really struggling. They're really having a hard time. And it's like, I appreciated her candor at the end when she thanked them and said that, she thanked them for keeping up because they don't have the resources that a private firm has. So I thought that at least she even acknowledged, like, I mean, you guys kept up. That's you don't have the resources that these homies over here have. Like, you talking about Microsoft lawyers? I knew I could tempt you to do it, Mitch.
I like how Hayes says I'm up Microsoft's ass. What did I say that made me lean towards Microsoft? Because I said my gut feeling is they're going to win. Oh, look at this shill. What a shill. I didn't get to yell Mitch. The thing is that I think today was hopefully a really good discussion for people to see. There's room for disagreement on both sides. Like, Mike and I didn't call each other pony and bot. We just had a fun conversation for the last 2 hours. So, I was banning people throughout this stream that were just here to name call. You're not welcome here, man. You're not tall enough to ride this ride. I'm not going to abide children, I have 2 children of my own. They name call enough. I don't need them in my chat, okay? So I thought today was a great conversation. And every Friday, we roll over into an unfiltered VIP stream. So currently, if you got a gifted membership today, a ton of people got gifted. I already paid up my dues. Everybody can tune in tonight. My wife and I hang out, we talk, we have drinks and laughs. We were going to play Only Up, but apparently it's been removed from Steam due to stolen assets, which is really unfortunate. That was going to be so fun, so we'll have to figure out something else. Maybe we'll just do the wrestling game tonight since that was gifted to us. But make sure you get into our Discord and set up notifications so you don't miss tonight, okay? You don't want to miss out on tonight. But if you want to upgrade to VIP, we're about to go to Unfiltered VIP. Mike's going to come with us. But before we do that, Mike, where can they find you? What are you working on right now? You can find me over at 30NSG, Monday through Thursday, 10 o'clock in the morning to about noon Eastern, and we read the news. That's what we do. We read the news. I'm changing my format a little bit. So in the mornings, we just read the news. I don't do long dialogues and stuff like that. We literally read the news and have a conversation. It's like meeting me at the cafe, sitting down and like, hey, what's going on? And we just talk. I just talk with chat Monday through Thursday from 10 o'clock in the morning until noon Eastern. And we go from random stuff there. And then at night, Monday through Thursday, 8 p.m. to about midnight, I play different games. Last night we played AEW Fight Forever, had a blast with Sarge. The other night before, we played Starship Troopers, we played Division 2, we played Circuit Superstars. So we played lots of different games. I like to kind of show games that maybe people don't know about and then ask questions about it. And then, we just have a good old time. So, and then we do a podcast Thursday nights, which is on hiatus for a little bit, called Generation X Gaming. It's a weekly podcast that goes over a few of the top stories from the past week, and we rant along the way. And that's on Thursday nights. And then I'm here with you on Fridays.
Yeah, and we may do the AEW game tonight. That was gifted to me. So there, Big Mole set up another 20 gifted layups. So we may have somebody else slam it home here in just a second. I actually haven't scheduled the VIP stream. Mitch, you freaking crazy! I knew it. Mitch, you're insane. Takes it to 250. I actually owe you guys more now. I'm gonna have to do that. I haven't even scheduled the VIP stream. We can do a little like final riff here. Thanks, Dark Taco. What with this all going on and kind of like drowning.
I'm drinking Sprite. Is a hidden Easter egg. I'm actually an Xbox fanboy. It's green. I don't know if anyone.
Oh, come on. With all this kind of cannibalize the news a little bit. Is there anything that's happened in gaming that you've been kind of discussing and going over? You said, you're reading these stories every day. Has anything happened in the past week that you felt like was worth talking about or worth mentioning?
Let me scroll open my submitted stories, because I do so many different stories throughout the week. Let me see if anything. One of the stories I was very surprised, and I kind of brought it up during the show, was the amount of money that Last of Us and Horizon cost, right? Like, I thought they were expensive, but I didn't think they were $200 million expensive, right? And
oh yeah, right, yep.
To me, that's eye-opening, and again I brought it up on the show, because you see Sony pivoting, because they have to wait 7 years for those games to come out, and they pump $250 million into those games, and then Horizon is successful. It's not successful, but it sold 8 million copies, right? The Forbidden West. So if you compare it, it's not as a one-to-one like movies, but like if a movie spends $200 million, they got to make about $600 million back to make profit. So I don't know how the marketing is in gaming, but to make a $212 million game and you sell 8 million copies, that you're coming pretty close. Yes, they're making profit, but it's like, holy Christ, I didn't know the ballooning of these first-party titles and these AAA games, they can't go up much more, because then they have to sell like Call of Duty numbers, like 30 million copies, 15 million copies to be profitable. So it'll be interesting to see how that works in the future with these games, because if they get too big, they won't be profitable anymore, and they're going to have to do what Microsoft is doing, make a AA games and put them on Game Pass and charge $10 a month.
What's crazy is the studios that put those games out have recently expanded and grown. So Sony must be seeing the profit. They must be seeing the worthy investment, because that would be, I think, pretty indicative of this is working for them, because somebody's saying, oh, they need the live. Zubair said they need the live service games to subsidize these first parties. I don't know. They seem to see that the virtuous cycle is working. They're investing in these studios and growing them. So I know there's some speculation and some crunching of numbers that thought that the speculation and the estimate is that each game made $300 million in profit.
Okay,
that's what they made in profit. That's after everything. It's after market.
That's enough money to make the next game for the next 5 to 10 years for developers, right?
Right. And so we also have to consider that as saturation grows, you would hope that these games make a little bit more, right? They sell to more people because the footprint gets bigger, and with the prices going up, that also should help. So I tried to tell people, I said, this is an eye-opening thing for people that sit here with this entitlement of, well, put games everywhere, and why do game prices have to go up? It's like, do you have any idea how much more expensive it would be to make these games for more platforms? And then your margins are even more razor thin, because now you really got to sell well everywhere, and you got to spend more time on QA and bug squashing, because you're not on one system, you're on multiple.
Yeah, it's just crazy to me that it was I was like $200 million, because I remember hearing back in the day when Destiny came out, they're like, it's $500 million, but that was like $500 mil over the course of the lifespan that they were going to spend or whatever, and they made that well over. But yeah, this is why Sony is switching over to live service games, because the live service model, man, they can make that money in a quarter. They don't have to wait 5 years to wait to make that money. They can literally make that money in a quarter or a half a year.
Right. And that's where I do think a lot of the, why does it got to be live service? Why do we why do we got to do monetization? This, that, and the third. I think a lot of that is just, it's entitlement that's not in line with what goes into really good games. And I really think, everybody's going to hate me for banging on this drum, but this just really exposes the problem with Game Pass. If games of that quality require that much money, how on earth do you make that back without selling the game? How?
I think Microsoft, if they focused on making a game like Starfield once every couple years, they could. But they also, as you're doing it, it's like this, you're making the consumer base, if you get a Starfield, then the next game that comes out on Game Pass, you want to be like Starfield. You know what I'm saying? Like the quality of Starfield. And that's unsustainable. You can't have that every single quarter to come out, right? It takes time to build these games, and so that's why they go out and buy these other companies to come into Game Pass for third-party games, because they can't. Netflix just is proving this. They can't make first-party films and television series that frequently because it's unsustainable. It costs too much money to do.
Yeah, Hilly's making a good point. Those big AAAs from Sony don't have any microtransactions, so that might be the way forward for the Game Pass games. I'm still interested to see what kind of microtransactions we see in Starfield. I think there will be some, and I think they'll use the Creation Club to really
they also
make it profitable.
I was gonna say they're also selling DLCs, right? They said they have a lot of DLCs coming. So
yeah, and that's not shade. I just think from an economic standpoint, it's eye-opening to say, oh my gosh, that these were small, not huge teams, 200 to 300 people working on a game for one platform, and that's how much it cost.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Wow. That's big. So, all right, I am ready to take you guys with us over to the VIP stream. Listen, if you can't come with us, all you got to do is upgrade for $5. You just need to go to your purchases on your profile or just go to the membership page on this channel and just upgrade. If you got gifted, it's $5 to upgrade. Now, if you can't upgrade to VIP, listen, while you're not getting to come to the unfiltered thing, you can come hang out tonight. So make sure you get in our Discord. There's a link below. Get in the Discord and support all the other, ways that we do things here. I'm going to put a link in chat to the VIP stream, and then I'm going to bring everybody over, and then my producer's going to join us. I feel like we went long today, so Mike might not be able to hang out as long as usual.
Yeah, it's like 2:30. I got about 20 minutes.
Okay. Hey, thanks so much for being a VIP. You get to see a little bit behind the curtain every week. It's a little bit more unfiltered and raw. My producer joins us, and we talk about how'd the week go? What is going on? This frickin' case. My producer made a thumbnail that said, please make it end, or whatever it says. And we hope you've enjoyed these unfiltered streams as a VIP. And we also hope that you enjoy the Friday nights with Madam. We've switched that into more of a talk show for the first hour or two. And then we switch and play a game. So we hope we see you tonight. And I'm going to end the previous stream where Mike and I went through a bit of a recap of the FTC case.